If your managers act like employees instead of leaders, the first thing to look at is not at them. The first place is to look at the system that taught them to act that way. Now, sometimes the person is the problem. You hired the wrong person, you promoted too fast, you gave someone a title that they weren't ready to carry. That happens. But if this is a common or chronic pattern across the company, the harder question is not, why don't these people get it? Instead, the real question you should be asking is, what are we doing or not doing that makes this behavior, this problem normal, or at least common? Because managers don't really take ownership of outcomes just on accident. They become owners of the expectations or the outcomes when expectations are clear, when their authority is real, when accountability is consistent, and when the culture of your organization supports their ability to lead. In this video, I want to help you diagnose why your management team may be acting like employees or not taking ownership instead of acting like the kind of leaders you would hope they would be, and what kind of reset needs to happen. Okay, so many times when leaders are trying to build a company, they get frustrated because they bring in management, and then the management doesn't just create this automatic lift. And in fact, the managers start to feel like as much or more work than when they didn't have people in management positions or in leadership positions. And so this can create a lot of frustration, it can create tension, and it can create a tendency to, for senior leaders to just take work on themselves. Here's the first thing in terms of diagnosis, like if this is a problem for you, is that this issue with managers not taking ownership or not really stepping up into the leadership role that you were hoping for, this should be a rare thing. It'll happen sometimes because you promote too quickly, you hire the wrong person, a mistake happened. That happens. But if this is chronic, if this is widespread across your organization or seems to keep happening, it's a pattern, then the issue is not the people. The issue is you and the system or culture that you have created. And so what we want to do is start to look at how do we fix it? Because these things happen and they can happen kind of easily, but they're also fixable. So we'll talk about that. The answer to this comes from asking a different question. Not why are these people not getting it? Not why are they not taking ownership? But what are we doing or what am I doing that's creating this tendency for people to not take ownership? And typically it'll show up in one of these areas or one or more of these areas, which is there's a lack of clarity around expectations or the communication of expectations. Lines of authority, lines of decision-making haven't been clearly defined, or authority hasn't been clearly delegated to people. There aren't good accountability practices within the organization. There is a culture that allows informality or allows things to slip or allows something to happen. Maybe the culture is to control decision-making at the top, but there's some kind of cultural element. In other words, there's a pattern in behavior and decision-making that isn't supporting ownership to be carried throughout the company. And another part of it is there may be a hiring problem. I've seen organizations where once we changed some of the hiring criteria and we gave the recruiters and the hiring team a different lens to think through that was more in alignment with where the company was trying to go, then they all of a sudden started finding the kinds of people that they needed to bring. And that started with the recruitment language that they used, the screening language, and the onboarding. So the symptoms of managers that are not really taking ownership are usually pretty obvious, but oftentimes people who have the title of you're the grand poobah of whatever you're in charge of, they're not doing certain things. They're usually waiting to be told what to do. They might be bringing problems to you, but they're not coming with recommendations or their ideas for solving the problems. They might avoid decision-making. You just notice that things never really get decided or acted on. They tend to become very protective of their department or their role. There's a lot of excuses and deflection, maybe scapegoating going on. They tend to be very reactive instead of intentional and planning oriented. They might be focusing on, as I mentioned before, they're focused on explaining missed results instead of just owning them and figuring out how to change results next time. And they will often look to permission when permission wasn't expected, or your giving permission wasn't needed, instead of just taking the initiative and solving a problem. There may be other ways that this shows up, But when you start to see those kinds of things show up on your team, the likelihood, especially if it's broadly on the team, the likelihood of that being just an individual problem is pretty low, and it's more likely systemic or cultural issue, which you as the leader have a responsibility to fix and to change. Particularly, and this is a caveat, if you're working with a new leader, a new manager, if you're working with somebody who's a brand new frontline supervisor, they may not have the confidence or knowledge or experience to really automatically know some of those things, so they might need some coaching and encouragement. But if we're talking about mid-level, and especially anybody that's a senior manager, this should not be stuff that you're working with them. And so that stuff, they should be coming into the job with confidence. They should already understand the job. They should have that knowledge base. And so if there's still a hesitancy, if there's still delays, if they're still coming to you with problems and no active work towards solutions, if they're still being reactive, then we need to figure that out. That's a not acceptable set of behavior at a senior leadership role. So the question you want to ask here is not, is everybody taking the same level of ownership that you might? You have this senior role. Maybe you own the company, maybe you're the CEO, whatever your title is. You can't expect everyone to have your sense of ownership. That probably isn't realistic, but they should have an appropriate level of ownership for their actual job, for their actual sphere of responsibility. Do they own that? And some things that you want to look at that will tell you if they're owning that is, do they own the results? Do they make sure that the results happen and they feel a sense of responsibility to ensure that? Do they carry and do they demonstrate the organizational values within their sphere of responsibility? Are they actively supporting and working towards the vision even without being moved or herded in that direction? Do they actively protect the priorities of the organization and make sure that things are on track? And do they work to help strengthen the culture of the organization? If they do those things, those are all demonstrations of ownership. Do they have a tendency to think systemically and to think across the company? Do they like to, and do they come to you thinking downrange? Do they think in second and third order of results or impact to decisions? Or are they thinking time-wise? Are they thinking, well, how is this going to impact things 6 months from now, a year from now? That's the kind of thinking that you want to have on a senior leadership team, and that's what you should be looking for. So if they were hired well, if you did bring in the right people, for sure it was the system or the culture, or not for sure, but 97% for sure, it was the system or the culture that's failed them. They were the right person to do the job. Something is preventing them from being successful. If that's true, we're going to assume they were the right hire. We're going to assume that you got those things in place. I want to look at the 4 things that might be there that would prevent a good hire from taking ownership in an organization. If this is useful to you, please take a moment to like the video and to subscribe. It really helps other people find good content like this and to find my channel. 1, not told what to own. Maybe that seems obvious, but I couldn't tell you how many times I've walked into an organization and I've asked people what's their job, and I get a job title, and then I ask, what are the expectations? What are they supposed to do? And they're doing all these other things over here. And so it's pretty clear that when they came in, what they were probably hired for and what they're actually being asked to do are not the same thing. And then that person tells me they're not really sure what they're responsible for, because they've got this job title, this job description, and 50% of their time is over here. So that's an issue that needs to be cleared up. Or people are brought in and they're never really given a good job title. They're never really clarified. It's not clear what their role is or their responsibility is. It's not clear who they report to or for what. More common than you might think in small and medium-sized organizations to have a lot of ambiguity around roles and to have things that just sort of evolve over time. Responsibilities vague, outcomes are assumed but not defined. They might have made up their own version of the job. I used to do that all the time as an employee. No one's going to tell me what to do. I'll make up something I want to do and that I think is important. Many people will respond to ambiguity by doing less than what you might hope. There's a few people who will actually do more, but it might not be what you wanted them to do. They're going to take direction in their own direction, and you may or may not like that. The second thing is they're not empowered. So they've been given a role, they've been given a responsibility, but they haven't been given the authority, the resources, the access, or decision rights to make it happen. So they have to keep coming back to you to get permission to spend, or to get permission to utilize some staff, or whatever the thing is. And so if you're in a situation where I'm tasking you to get this job done, but each step of the way you need to check in with me to make sure you can take the next step, obviously you haven't really empowered them to go ahead and pursue that responsibility. So what you want to think is, what is it I'm giving this person to own? What's the outcome that they need to pursue? And what are the resources that they're going to need, the authority, etc., that they're going to need to be successful? How do I give that to them in a way that is both safe for the company, but also lets them just run for it and go for it and not have to check in constantly? Third problem is they're not held accountable. And this is a big issue for a lot of people. They feel like accountability is this, I get asked all the time, how do you hold somebody accountable? Or how do you make them accountable? And I don't think it's a big deal. If I have a team of people and we agree that these are the jobs that we're going to get done over the next month, over the next quarter, I just check in with them once a month or once a week or whatever the time frame is that makes sense, and ask about the progress. If we decide, okay, we've got a quarterly set of work to do, and so we've got this many months to get it done in, and so over here's the middle way point on each of these, we should know what will indicate that you're on progress halfway, and then at the end of the month, what's progress halfway through the at 90 days, and what's progress at 45 days, and what's progress at 60 days. My math is not amazing right at the moment. And so on, all the way through that. And you sit down and you just meet with people and say, where are we doing? How are we doing in terms of the goals or the responsibilities you have for where we needed to be at this point? You adjust this to their role and to the task or the responsibility set, and you just sit down and talk to them about it. It can be a very quick conversation. It will be a quick conversation if you've defined the milestones along the way well. It doesn't take that long. And that's accountability. And that's all that's needed. It's not about getting angry. There's nothing to get angry about there. It's just asking, okay, we both said you were going to be at this point, and so where are we at? And they say either I'm on that point or I haven't gotten to it yet. And then you say, why not? Have a conversation with them about it. If you find out that they didn't have some of the resources they needed, okay, you work with that. If it turns out that they are stuck with a mindset issue and they feel intimidated and they just haven't gotten the confidence to get started, you coach them through that. You work through that. If it finds, you kind of work through it on all of these things. Just the simple act of tracking where people are at and having regular conversations that they know are going to come will tend to snap things together and make progress begin to happen. It's a huge part of gaining traction in organizations. Don't be afraid to have these regular conversations because it's so helpful and it saves a lot of time. The key to this is these don't have to be 1-hour conversations once a week. They can easily be a 15-minute conversation or 10-minute conversation if everybody shows up knowing these are the metrics or the milestones I need to report against, and that's the point of the conversation. We get together, I report on my milestones, and we move on. The third thing, or the fourth, is they were slapped down arbitrarily. And what I mean here is they tried to do the right thing, they tried to take initiative, they tried to do something, and they got smacked down. They were told they were wrong, and it wasn't really clear what they did about why that. Or they were overridden in some way, they got embarrassed, maybe they were called out in front of a group, somebody second-guessed a decision, you or some other manager did that, whoever they report to. This slap down can cause people to pull back and not engage in that way. And I've seen that just kill ownership and kill responsibility in organizations where leaders really want their team to step up, but when somebody makes a mistake, smack them down. That person is not going to step up again. They're not likely to expose themselves to that risk. And so that's part of what you need to pay attention to is, has that happened with this person? And if so, even if you think it was done for the right reasons, if you're getting a reaction where this person's no longer stepping up, you might have to go back and do some kind of damage control or fix on this. Or evaluate yourself. Was there a trust issue on your side? Was there an insecurity issue on your side? Like, why was there an arbitrary smackdown? Or maybe it's not arbitrary, but it was done inappropriately. It was done in front of other people and the person was embarrassed, things like that. There might need to be some fixing, not in the correction, but in how the correction was applied. Now, if they were not hired well, then the problem is trying to figure out how did they get the job. So that's a different issue altogether. So this is assuming it was a good hire, but they're not performing, they're not stepping up. Not just briefly talking about people that were not good hires. They just shouldn't have been in the role. Somebody that was hired rushed, that you needed people in the position, warm body hire, you just needed to fill it, so you did, and it turns out they just weren't ready or they weren't the right person. Peter Principle promotions. So a Peter Principle is the idea that somebody's really good at something, they're really good at sales, and so they get promoted to sales manager, and then it turns out that they're not a good manager. And so they were a good employee, they were promoted because they were a good employee. Now the saying in this is people get promoted to their level of incompetence. And so they're good, they get promoted, they're good, they get promoted, they're not good, they're incompetent at this level. Now they're stuck because people don't know what to do with that because every other option seems like a demotion. It's awkward, it's uncomfortable. So you want to be careful that you're hiring or promoting people for the job that they're supposed to take on, not as a reward for their past job. Huge problem, common problem, is to reward people with promotions because of what they've done, not because they're prepared for what they're going to need to do. The third thing is hiring for personality instead of performance. This happens a lot. You meet someone, they're fantastic to talk to, they're super charismatic, they're fun, they're smart, they're insightful, they're whatever, but they don't know how to do the job, or they don't carry things through very well. And so that's also possibly not a good hire. Sometimes people hire family or friends, and that just creates all sorts of problems. That's why so many companies have nepotism rules to prevent this, because it just creates, it's conflicts of interest, and it creates all kinds of issues. Not that hiring family or friends is wrong, it's just that when things go wrong, it's very hard to fix. And so it's better if you don't create scenarios like that if that's possible. Promoting somebody because they've been a loyal employee is a very common reason, especially in small businesses, but even in large ones where people get promoted. You've been here for 15 years. I know that you got my back. Here, you get a job that you don't know how to do. That doesn't do anybody any favors other than at the beginning when they get to, put a fancy new title on their business card, and then they go ahead and fail, and that doesn't feel good to them. So you're not taking care of them well if you do that to somebody. And then the last part, and this actually happens more often than you might think, is hoping that if I give somebody this job, this title, then they will take ownership. That the thing that's missing in terms of them taking ownership of their role is I haven't given them a job yet, or I haven't given them a big enough title yet. Or I see this with owners sometimes. If I give them equity, then they will act like an owner. No, they will not. If they already take ownership of things and act like that, then that's how they will continue to likely act. But if they're not acting that way, there's no reason to expect it's going to all of a sudden magically appear. And so you shouldn't promote somebody hoping that that causes them to step up. Promote them because they've stepped up and they're the right person for whatever that job is. So there's 4 things to think through in terms of trying to diagnose why somebody might not be fitting well into a position. And you can spend time thinking about this. I just want to give you a short way of looking at it. This is a lens I use frequently when I do organizational diagnostics, is I look at the leader, which if this is you, the person who's responsible for the whole thing, I want to know, what has this leader created or allowed or failed to address that's creating this situation? So that's a question to ask yourself. Have at times this person wanted ownership and said they wanted ownership, but then punished initiative in some way? Or does this person avoid hard conversations like around accountability or being clear about what they want? If the issue is a person issue, the person of the leader, then this is where the fix needs to happen mostly. The second part is relationships. Are there family issues? Are there friendship issues that are preventing people from having good accountability conversations? Are there like special deal relationships? Like, I'll take that job, but I'm not going to do half of the things that are needed. And I can get away with that because I'm related to you, or we're friends, or whatever. Are there loyalty issues that create challenges in the relationships? Is somebody afraid of somebody for some reason? Is there a tendency to avoid conflicts between the two people? Are some people protected from having to live up to the same standards that someone else would have to live up to? These are all relational dynamics that the leader needs to be willing to address. but it's something to look at, like, oh, is this part of what's driving this issue in terms of a manager not really stepping up or doing their job? I've worked with companies where the manager, hires their son or their wife or something like that, and you see an unsurprising lack of accountability or perceptions of favoritism in that scenario. That's a relational dynamic that creates a problem. And so these things are sometimes pretty foreseeable, but they still happen a lot. Maybe the system, and this is where I see most of these challenges happen, are the basics clear? Was the role defined that they were hired for? Were the outcomes that they were supposed to accomplish defined? Was authority defined and given to them? Who they report to, what decisions they can make, what decisions they can't make? Is that all clear? Are success metrics defined? Was decision-making rights defined? Were they onboarded sufficiently? Did they get all the information that they needed? And so on. The systemic dynamics are usually, when you fix those things, it tends to fix problems that show up in relationships. Here's what usually happens in organizations. Is there's a problem that shows up here. Often the leader has a hard time acknowledging ownership because it feels like, well, that's their problem. And oftentimes the fix is system or culture. And in culture, I mean, does the company still act like an informal mom and pop when they should be acting like a larger organization? And you might think, well, how far can you go as a mom and pop? I've seen 9-figure companies that still operated very much like mom and pops, created massive problems, and they couldn't operate like that for long, but it happens. Are real decisions made by a small group? Is there an informal way that real decisions made? I remember being involved with one organization that was very family-led, very family-run, and there was a whole decision-making process that they had asked me to be part of. And then one day we showed up to continue the decision-making conversation, and I was told, oh, the family met. This is not a family-owned business. There was just a lot of family in it. Family had met at a, barbecue somewhere over the weekend, made the decision on behalf of everyone else informally, outside of the decision-making structure, and then came back and just told us how it was going to be. At that point, I quit because I felt like this is not a system that respects my time. You'd asked me to participate, and then so it killed the ownership any ownership I would have given to them in the sense of trying to make something happen. Are people invited into leadership meetings but excluded from having real influence? Are they sitting at the table and then being essentially told to shut up? If any of those kinds of things happen, you're going to have to expect disengagement. If there's cultural issues in terms of how communication happens, how authority is shared, how decision-making is shared, how accountability works, if there's a conflict avoidant, this is maybe one of the biggest issues, is if there's a conflict avoidant culture, then oftentimes there's a tendency to not address issues and to just let them go. Any of these kinds of things kill ownership. So I like to look at these 4. The leader is usually the person who can create changes. Relationships might be the source of the problem, but oftentimes it's where the problem shows up. And oftentimes the solution comes from fixing the systems which support your culture. Hopefully that is a helpful way to look through that. So the first move, if you're struggling with issues with your management team, not taking ownership, is to hit some kind of a reset. And the way I recommend doing a reset is to just announce it to your management team. Say, hey folks, we've been running with this regular, consistent problem. We're hitting a reset. From now on out, expectations are clear, and here's specifically what they are. These are the standards that people have to meet. This is the way we're going to evaluate performance. And these are the metrics. So everybody knows whether or not you're performing the way you're supposed to perform. And these are the accountability practices, the accountability cadence that we're going to use. And you just name it, you explain it. If it was your fault, you own that. And then you say, now this is the new set of rules moving forward. And people will opt in or opt out of those new sets of rules. But now everybody understands how the game is supposed to be played. And what will happen, most cases, is you will see at least some people step up in terms of the ownership that they're willing to take on. And you'll see some people possibly say, I don't like this. This is not the place for me. Well, at least you know that. Go ahead and find good right hires or promotions and fill out your team. And then move forward with that clarity around those things, addressing behaviors that are not helpful for your goals, and working out your relationships and how you personally lead. If this issue describes your company, the next video is often uncomfortable for founders or senior leaders. You might need to lead people who know more than you do in their area. And that requires a different kind of credibility and a different approach to leadership. Now, I cover that in a video on the screen that should be showing up right now, which is how to lead people who know more than you. Click it, and I'll see you over there.